Hi, my name is Julia, or you can call me Jules. This is my channel. I make videos about my recovery from anorexia. So I received a question recently asking me to talk about my experience of inpatient treatment. So before I start talking about my experience, I want to first of all say that whether you go to inpatient treatment, whether you participate in any kind of intensive treatment or not, or any treatment at all, that does not invalidate your eating disorder. Second of all, I want to emphasize that this is my personal experience. I know that from the people that I met in the unit, which is what it's called, we all had quite different experiences. So whatever I say in this video, I don't really want it to put people off the unit. I guess I can understand why people are interested in hearing my experiences. I think residential or inpatient treatment can be really helpful for some people. In my case, I didn't find it so helpful. Maybe my experience can help you decide whether you're at a stage in recovery or of your eating disorder where residential treatment might be helpful for you. So I had a pretty severe relapse into anorexia at the end of 2018. I was living overseas at the time and I ended up moving home in that December and resuming treatment with the team who I had been with prior to moving overseas. So I wasn't able to get an appointment until January. For a long time we talked back and forth about me going to residential treatment and I really didn't want to. I really did not want to go. When I arrived home in December, I did feel like that's what I needed. I was absolutely exhausted, and when I got home I just handed over control of my food to my parents and ate what they would serve me. I really didn't feel sick enough to go to residential treatment. I didn't think I was thin enough. I thought that everyone else in the treatment centre would think that I was fat or undeserving of being there. I went and visited the place before deciding that I would go there, and the staff there seemed nice. It seemed like a nice enough environment. So in the end I did decide to go to the unit, in large part for my family's sake, because I knew they were really worried about me, and my parents were, well, my mum in particular was struggling to cope with that, and that I felt really terrible about that. At the end of February I was admitted to the unit. It was one of the scariest things that I have ever done. So I went to the unit with my mum, got admitted. I had to get like an ECG done, wait, doctor checked me over, all that stuff, and then it was straight into morning tea, we sat around a table. There weren't many of us there. There were I think there are only 5 of us there at that time. So we would all sit around a table in the dining room with the nurse at the other end, and we had 15 minutes allocated to eat our snacks. We were able to choose our snacks based on a list that we were given. Usually that would happen the night before, but because I had only arrived that morning, I had to choose it pretty much immediately when I arrived. Immediately I found it really hard for several reasons. Maybe I'll talk about that at the end. Yep, so then after morning tea, you have seated time. I think seated time for 30 minutes. Then after lunch, which you're allocated half an hour, you have seated time for an hour. Then you have afternoon tea, seated time dinner, seated time, evening snack, seated time. And during seated time you have to sit together in a lounge and be monitored by a nurse. The bathrooms are locked, you can't use the bathroom at that time to prevent people from purging. Morning tea was like a banana and nuts, and then for lunch I was served half a sandwich. Afternoon tea I was served fruit balls, maybe dried apricots, I don't know. Dinner was macaroni cheese, and night snack I had selected something but I didn't end up having it. So throughout the day, I was told before I arrived that there would be activities to keep us occupied. There were some activities. There was an activities coordinator at the unit I was at, and so we did some activity around our values, which was fine. That was quite interesting, finding out what values are meaningful for us and talking about them. We also did some yoga at some point, which I didn't really want to do, to be honest. I was feeling really crappy that day, which I think is quite understandable. But there is an expectation that if you're there, you participate in all the activities, which I also find kind of weird because yoga is sort of a form of exercise. So if I don't want to do that, I feel like that should be okay. Anyway, and then we also went for a short walk. In the day they drove me to get my blood taken from a clinic. So that was basically the logistics of the unit. You also share a room with 1 or 2 other people. Everyone is there voluntarily. So like you have to agree to be there even though you might really not want to be there. You do have to agree to it yourself. They can't like force you in there. No one there was wearing like a tube or something like that. There is an expectation that you eat your meals and you finish your meals. If you don't, you get a flag and you have to drink a supplement shake. If you don't do that, you get an extra special flag and now can like have to review your place in the unit. So basically I found my admission day extremely difficult. I felt out of place. I didn't really feel welcomed. I was clearly struggling. I couldn't focus on anything. I brought a book with me. I couldn't focus on it. I couldn't connect to the Wi-Fi. I couldn't distract myself, and during the seated time that really drove me crazy because I was just thinking about the food that we were eating. I was thinking about how guilty I felt. I was thinking about the meal times and rehashing how they were going and what was coming up next. I felt very, very much alone. None of the nurses came to talk to me. A couple of the other clients in the unit chatted to me briefly, which was nice. I felt really lonely, and I also felt just horrible about myself because it is an institutional environment and it felt very punitive, I guess. I felt like I was being punished. Even then, even though I was really sick, like I was living with an eating disorder, but I was not my eating disorder. Like there's more to someone than their mental illness, but it felt like me as a person was being punished rather than an encouraging environment where we would try to conquer our eating disorders. with support. So I actually wrote down in my journal a few months after my experience in residential treatment why I felt like it didn't work for me. But basically, throughout the day, my thoughts continued to worsen. I also think that, I was only served half a sandwich at lunch, which was less than I was eating at home. And when I am not given enough food, then my eating disorder is like 2 times worse, because not only do I feel guilty for eating, but I also feel hungry, which is like the worst of both worlds in my opinion. Like, it would have been better to have a whole sandwich and probably some other food and feel actually full. And then, yeah, I would feel guilty, but at least I wouldn't feel hungry and still be thinking about wanting to eat more, but knowing that I can't for another 2 hours. So just sitting there thinking, when can I eat? Anyway, and that continued until after dinner, where I decided it wasn't going to work for me. And I left. I wanted to tell someone how I was feeling. I needed to cry, and there was nowhere to go. And I needed to just tell someone that I was feeling so awful and I didn't know how to deal with these thoughts. But there was no one there to talk to. And so I went there thinking, I admitted myself to the unit thinking that it would be easier than eating on my own at home, which is what I've been trying to do, because at least then, like, I'd have support, and like the nurses would like encourage me to keep eating and like say that I was doing well and be able to help me rationalize my thoughts. But it wasn't like that at all. It was very much, you're just there for the mechanical part of recovery, to eat the food and move on, except that moving on is incredibly difficult when you have an eating disorder. So feeling really desperate, really isolated. Once seated time was up, I went downstairs and thinking that I might talk to someone. No one was there, but the door was open, and I ran away. So yeah, I ran home, and well, actually I ran to the bus stop and then I bussed home. I don't want to encourage people to run away from their treatment, but I don't regret leaving. I really don't. So I wrote down some reasons why I felt like the unit wasn't suitable for me and why it wasn't going to help me in my recovery and why I left. The first reason was that the other clients were still very disordered, and I didn't want that to have an influence on me. The clients talked about food a lot. I don't want to speak badly of them because they were struggling. Like, obviously they talked about food a lot. That's what people with eating disorders do. But it's not really helpful to be in that. I didn't find it helpful to be in an environment where we're all thinking about food, we're all going to talk about food. It's not helpful to analyze it. But that's what we do, because that's all we're thinking about. The other clients would also engage in behaviours at meal times, like cutting their food up into tiny pieces, etc. I don't need to go on. And it definitely did feel invalidating to a degree for my eating disorder, because I didn't do any of that stuff. I haven't had behaviours like that throughout my eating disorder. And I found it frustrating that I would finish my meal and then in like a normal amount of time, because I didn't eat particularly slowly, but then I would have to sit there for the full 20 minutes and watch the other people struggle to eat their food when I'd eaten my banana and nuts in like 2 minutes. And I didn't see why I had to keep sitting there. I understand why, because they wanted to make sure that I wasn't going to purge or do something like that, but that also wasn't a part of my disorder. And I just wish that, I guess they need more staff for the treatment to be more individualised, but unfortunately it's not a lot of money for mental health services. So that leads to a greater issue. And I was told that it's good that I don't have any of those behaviours so then I can model to other patients. But that's not my job. I was not there to be a model for the other patients. I was there to get support for myself. I wanted help for me, not me to be helping them. I can see where they're coming from, but that's not what I was seeking. And I think it's really important to teach people that we don't need to be helping others all the time. It's okay to just get help for ourselves when we need it. I also felt like there was a sense of competition among the clients, which I did not appreciate. I also felt quite out of place because I didn't feel like I was in the mechanical phase of eating as much as the others were. I actually did get pleasure from eating, but I felt like I had to cover that up a little bit because for the others, eating really was a huge chore. I actually enjoyed the macaroni cheese, but even the dietitian said to me prior to dinner, oh wow, you really chose a challenge tonight. What a night to join the unit. Which also was unhelpful, because I feel like it's more helpful to ask someone if they're feeling challenged rather than to assume it is a challenge, because then that just has a whole lot of ramifications, well, why aren't I scared of mac and cheese? What did they put in the mac and cheese? The other points that I wrote down were that the unit felt very institutional, much more so than I had anticipated. Drinks had to be served at a particular temperature between X and Y degrees Celsius. Dinner was measured precisely, so that was 20 minutes or 30 minutes long. Start at 5:32, end at 6:02, precise. It also didn't feel very patient-centered, which I talked about before. There was a lack of privacy, which I found really tough. I needed a place to cry and there was nowhere to do that. I felt really bored because the activities didn't last very long, and so there was a lot of spare time, which I struggled to fill. My meal plan was also too small, so I was hungry, I had a headache, and pretty strong eating disorder thoughts. They usually have meetings with your psychiatrist or dietitian, someone on your first day, but I did not have that. I didn't even know that was a thing until after I'd left. I thought I was just in it by myself. I also just didn't really know what the structure of the place was. I didn't know when I could shower, where to get a towel, when I would go to sleep. There were some things that were not explained, and that I think contributed to my whole anxiety about the experience. So in the end, the unit didn't work for me. But that's not to say that it wouldn't work for others, and this is obviously very specific to the treatment centre that I was at, where I live, and every treatment centre will be a bit different. I also noted down who I think the unit might be useful for. I did hear from people who did find the unit helpful and did improve. And so I think that the residential treatment probably is helpful for people still in the mechanical phase of eating, people who are medically compromised and need to be in that environment with nurses around, people who can't make decisions about food, who experience a lot of that food paralysis, people who really aren't eating at all or are purging everything that they eat or can't stop excessively exercising, people who really don't have a clue about portion sizes or need meal ideas. The residents might be helpful for that because you do get a sense of some suggestion of a portion size. I eat more now than what was served to me, that's for sure, but for others maybe just eating really, really tiny amounts for a long time, maybe the residents would be helpful for that. People who have no hunger cues or desire to eat at all, people without supportive family, I think the unit could be really helpful. I think it seems like family-based treatment is really beneficial, and I've been lucky to move in with my parents during my recovery and have them support me and help me with meals. But if I didn't have that, I think the unit would also be really beneficial. Also, it might be useful for people who are really so low in weight that they're unable to distinguish their eating disorder cognitions from their healthy thoughts. And it also might be useful for people who are not totally committed to recovery yet, so that those people can get a boost in weight, which often helps to fuel a commitment to recovery, because with weight gain, your brain also functions better and you start to experience benefits of recovery. And so that motivation and commitment often seems to emerge after gaining some weight rather than prior to. Sorry for the really long video. I know that my experience of residential treatment was not optimal. Despite that, if you are in a place where you are medically compromised, you are struggling to commit to recovery, any of those points that I mentioned just before, then I would urge you to think about going into residential treatment if that's an option for you. I mean, the worst that can happen is that you try it out, it doesn't work, and you leave, which is what I did. And I don't regret going. Now I know that if my eating disorder gets worse again, that's where I'll be headed, and I really don't want to go back there. But also, I mean, at the end of the day, it was a new experience. Probably is a natural second part to this video where I talk about what happened after I left residential treatment. I'm not in the state now that I was when I left residential treatment almost 2 years ago. That might have to be my next video because this is too long. Even though residential treatment didn't work for me, I still am now in a pretty good place in my recovery, so there is still hope. Even if it doesn't work out, there is still hope. Okay, so thank you for watching, and I will record again soon. Okay, bye.